Good evening, thank you for coming, and thank you for your interest in Pablita Velarde, a remarkable woman artist, author, and entrepreneur from Santa Clara Pueblo. Pablita was born in New Mexico in 1916, over 100 years ago. So to put the year of her birth, 1916, into historical perspective, consider that New Mexico achieved statehood only 4 years before she was born, that the Museum of Art in Santa Fe was under construction, and that artist Robert Henry, who convinced the future Garcia Street painter John Sloan to move here, was the artist in residence at the Palace of Governors. Also in 1916, President Woodrow Wilson created the National Park Service, and under the Antiquities Act established Bandelier National Monument, a place synonymous with Pablita Velarde's emerging career as a New Deal artist employed by the WPA. The following year, 1917, the School of American Research was incorporated with an expanded mission, quote, to foster art in all of its branches through exhibitions and by other means which may from time to time be desirable. These other means brought me here as a resident scholar, and I thank SAR and the William and Nettie Adams for this 2019 Summer Fellowship in the History of Anthropology. The purpose of my research is to produce a book manuscript on an economic study of how Pablita Velarde made a living for herself and her children as a professional native artist and businesswoman. It's an innovative study in the history of Southwestern anthropology because only a few publications address the economic lives of Native American communities and individuals in the 20th century. Those are Pablita's pictures behind me there at the Chimayo Mercantile. Dr. William Adams himself published one of these. His 1963 monograph explored the business relationships between the Shanto trading post in northern Arizona and the local Navajo community. From extensive business records and his personal experience as a trader, Adams discovered that an annual income for Navajo households, this is in 1955, was based on a seasonal cycle of income from local enterprises and wage work. And it's this pattern of seasonality that's still relevant today and applies to the financial importance of the annual circuit of Indian markets in the lives of all Native artists. Why is it important? Well, because Indian market cycle determines an artist's production schedule and a large portion of their annual income. My research on Pablita Velarde as a businesswoman in Native arts contributes to the history of anthropology because it reveals the dynamics of economic change in 20th century Native American societies at the level of an individual. The hidden business histories of Native artists conceal the contributions of Indigenous women to the economy as small business owners, especially in non-traditional arts such as painting. Velarde's pioneering Native-owned business, established in the 1950s, transformed the future of Native art and economics. She became a role model for a new occupation as a professional Native artist and a successful, self-employed small business owner. For talented artists living on and off the reservation, this became a pathway to a sustainable career and financial independence. So today's presentation will introduce you to the story of how Pablita built her Native art business and her brand in the competitive and, at the time, male-dominated Indian art market of her times. To date, there are 4 artist biographies of Pablita Velarde. They were written between 1971 and 2012 by Mary Carol Nelson, Sally Heyer, Marcel Rouche, and Shelby Tisdale. They tell Pablita's life story as a, quote, painter of Indian pictures, as Velarde called herself. So why write another book? But scholarly research on the financial lives of artists is generally absent, not only in anthropology, but also in art history, and interestingly, not just for Native artists, but for also non-Native artists. To my knowledge, there's no monograph of an economic study of an individual artist. And this is partially understandable because of the relative lack of financial data. And the truth is, economic data on individual artists are very hard to find. However, my study is a partial portrait of an artist based on what information is accessible for study. And if nothing else, it's a start. So who was Pablita Velarde? Some members of the audience may want to know who she was, so I'll begin with a brief sketch of her life. Please note that my research is a financially informed artist biography. It's not art history. So I do not discuss her Pueblo painting as traditional or modern, unless it affects sales. I hope that this overview will be helpful for what follows, and I'll show a few slides of her work as I go through this short introduction. Pablita Velarde, 1916 to 2006, was born in Santa Clara Pueblo. At an early age, tragedy struck twice. Her mother died of tuberculosis, and soon afterward, Pablita herself lost partial sight from trachoma. Blindness was an ominous start for a child destined to become a painter, but she gradually recovered with treatments of native medicinal herbs. Pablita was one of the earliest female art students at the studio directed by Dorothy Dunn, who became her lifelong friend. Trained as a genre painter at the Santa Fe Indian School, Velarde's watercolor paintings depicted traditional ceremonies and scenes of everyday Pueblo life. She called these her, quote, memory pictures. During the Depression, Velarde was employed at Bandelier National Monument. Her Bandelier artwork remains one of Velarde's major achievements. During the 1940s, she married an Anglo man, Herbert Hardin, and lived in Albuquerque off reservation for the rest of her life. Pablita Velarde Hardin. You don't usually hear that third word. That was her legal name. She became a professional artist after the couple divorced in 1957, and she did it by necessity. She supported herself, her daughter, Helen Hardin, and son, Herbie Hardin, primarily by painting. And she recalled that after years of practice, I learned how to sell my work. I had to learn the hard way, mostly on my own. Pablita had a very strong independent spirit, and she refused to be constrained by cultural conventions, such as Pueblo painting, quote, was a man's work. Defiant and resilient, she had a strong sense of her vocation as an artist. During her 50-year career, Pablita was a savvy small business owner who became a living legend. From mid-century to her death in 2006, she was the most successful Native woman artist of her time. And now let's turn to the driving question of my economic study. How did Pablita make a living as a Native artist? And I'd like to begin with a true story. On a summer day in 1960, Pablita Velarde received a long-distance phone call at her family home in Albuquerque. It was from her talented teenage daughter, Helen Hardin, calling from the University of Arizona in Tucson, 500 miles away. The workshop on American Indian art that Helen attended was over. She was stranded, with no way to get home. But unfortunately, her mother had no extra cash after her recent divorce. Instead, Pablita gave her daughter practical advice from one artist to another. You know how to make money. Paint a painting and sell it. So Helen did. She painted this watercolor of a little girl standing between Pueblo clowns entitled Going Home. And like magic, Helen sold it and bought a bus ticket back home to New Mexico. So this story illustrates the alchemy of artists, how to turn a painting into cash, monetizing their art into income to solve life's everyday problems. It shows the critical role that finances play in the working life of a professional artist. For decades, Velarde operated a profitable home business. She made art She sold art, she paid bills, she filed taxes. But who talks about this? To Pablita, art was not only a passion, she knew that art was her sole means of making a living. To visualize this economic reality, take a look at her 1941 painting, Pueblo Craftsman, Palace of the Governors. This is at the Gilchrist Museum in Tulsa. There are no tourists in the scene. In fact, it's interesting to note that Pablita rarely painted non-Indians. This is a picture of commerce. Native craftspeople with their family who are self-employed selling their wares. Sales produce cash, which in turn pays the bills. There's gas for the car, electric lights, running water, and food. Money matters in the economic lives of artists. What buyers considered souvenirs are income for the sellers. The names of native artists also matters to buyers and sellers in the art world. Today, we would call it branding. That is, creating a memorable name that identifies a specific individual artist. And within a competitive marketplace, a recognizable name has value and commercial advantage. It also creates what people call brand loyalty or repeat customers. For Pablita Velarde as a professional native artist, her brand consisted of a compelling life story, Indian and Spanish names. Interestingly enough, she did not use pardon, and a signature line of earth paintings with a secret ingredient later disclosed as Elmer's glue. So a native artist's name was actually considered a brand in the commercial market, and an abundance of publications on Pablita consistently repeated that 1918 was the year of her birth. However, archival research and baptismal records proves that this date is incorrect, and it provides the correct birth date. Let's come back here. This is Pablita's parents, Herman Velarde and Mariana Chavarria, from Santa Clara Pueblo in 1913. They were Catholic, and they baptized their daughter shortly after her birth. The baptismal registry of Holy Cross Church documents every child's Spanish name, birthday, and baptismal date. The church records state that, as you can see in this next slide, Pablita, on the bottom, Pablita Velarde was born in Santa Clara on September 19th, 1916, not 18, and baptized 2 weeks later at Santa Cruz on October 1st, 1916. This date of 1916 is 2 years earlier than every published account. Inexact birth dates of native artists are not common. For example, and you'll see two paintings by Awatsira in this room, left and right. Recent research at the Heard Museum on the Pueblo painter and metalsmith, Awatsira, Alfonso Roybal, revealed that his true birth year was 1898, not 1895. So whereas Alfonso Roybal was 3 years younger, Pablita Velarde was actually 2 years older. These artist biographies will need to be revised along with museum collection catalogs, gallery records, and electronic online resources. And now I'd like to talk about native language names. W.W. Hill's ethnography of Santa Clara discusses the cultural practice of naming. The average person at Santa Clara Pueblo, he said, receives several names during the course of their lifetime. The child may have a dozen names, and the parents choose the one they like best. Hill also noted that the godmother generally gives the baby its first Tewa name, followed by an invitation to friends and relatives to offer the baby their own names. A few weeks later, the child would be taken to the church by the godparents and given a Mexican name at baptism. So Velarde explained the origin of her personal name. Quote, Everybody had Spanish names up to my generation, because in those days, the padres at Santa Cruz were all Spaniards, and so anybody that wanted a baby baptized got a Spanish name. We became what we became. Pablita, that's supposed to be a female version of Pablo, St. Paul. So how did this affect Pablita Velarde as a professional painter and a businesswoman? How did her Tewa and Spanish names add to her brand? In the commercial world, a native artist's name has promotional and monetary values. Signed artwork with Indian names written in the language of their home community are marks of authenticity. Santa Clara Tewa name of Cezanne for Pablita, or the Taos Pueblo Tewa name Pap Sheli for Marina Lujan. Although seemingly of cultural interest, Pablita's Indian names became significant in a financial study of the artist because her name improved her brand and validated her identity as a native artist. And this is a list of a pattern that I found based on a lot of small data, and that is a generalization. But let me go back to the picture here, which is here at IARC, and it was painted by Pablita. And in a way, she recounts her own naming ceremony in this picture. Pablita's paternal grandmother and midwife at her birth, Pablita Velarde Cisneros, gave the infant a Tewa name of Cezanne. I consulted with Tewa language native speakers about this name and its translation. One consultant validated that the translation Cezanne means golden dawn. Another Tewa language consultant offered a more nuanced translation as early yellow light. Pablita's name, Golden Dawn, was well known to every writer, every museum curator, and collector. A repeated mantra in books, newspapers, articles, and exhibit catalogs. Like the alchemy of turning art into money, her Tewa name foretold a golden, if you will, profitable business, and a dawn, an awakening of a new profession as a Native woman artist. Being named Golden Dawn was surely an asset in growing her brand. Perhaps to validate the fact that Pueblo children are given multiple names, a 1920s genealogy by ethnographer Elsie Blues Parsons documented another name for Pablita when she was 5 years old. Her Tewa name was recorded as, and if you'll go down to number 93, you will see the Tewa language name and the translation of yellow clay. The W stands for Winterside, Redstone stands for her clan, as Parson understood it, and then her age at 5. Yellow clay was further described in the ethnography as plaster used at the base of interior house walls. Let me go back to that. See the yellow clay? Okay. Then the text is referring to what you see on the edges of these two pictures, the one on the left being by Pablita. Yellow clay was described as plaster used at the base of interior house walls. This Indian name for a future artist is interesting because it refers to painting, albeit house painting. Pablita Velarde was a transitional Pueblo artist. So my research is also exploring the idea that Pablita Velarde, as a transitional Pueblo artist, bridged 2 generations of Native artists in the 20th century. The emphasis here is on economics of these art movements, not the stylistic or educational differences. I will be looking in future research at the financial support of Generation 1 Pueblo painters. Those are folks from pre-1936, from individual and institutional patrons. And Generation 2, post-1962, which was when IAIA was established, the economics was based in the fine art markets. So I'm hoping to relate Velarde's federal government patronage during the New Deal to her transition from an emerging artist to an independent, self-employed professional artist. The New Deal and Native artists. During the Depression, daring federal relief programs were funded to provide jobs and promote the nation's recovery from financial crises. In the Southwest, emergency employment programs had the direct and immediate effect on financial lives of Native people. And in New Mexico in particular, the New Deal public art projects offered economic opportunities for eligible, and that's a key word in this federal employment. Eligible was like a code word for trained, educated, has art instruction behind them. And that's important because as skilled laborers, they made more money. There was a wage relationship between that eligibility. So the government promoted their art and paid artists a living wage. These contested relief programs, and this is another one of her, Pablita's pictures. These contested relief programs were very careful in accounting for each federal dollar was spent. So meticulous, and there's Pablita, and by the way, I'll draw your attention, and I've got a pointer, so here goes. That's an aluminum muffin pan. And she had her pigments in there, and I've seen that on 1930s Native artists who were muralists consistently. It was cheap, it was portable, it was light, and it worked really well. The government promoted their art and paid artists a living wage, and they were very careful about how the money was spent. So these meticulous employment records document the wages of contemporary Native artists during the 1930s, such as Pablita and her role model, Tonita Plena, and other Santa Fe school students. And this is interesting in a financial study because the data on names, dates, and weekly wages allow researchers to pursue a quantitative and comparative study of young New Deal Native artists, some not so young, but it's very interesting. You could do a gender study on Tonita's wages. Tonita was older, had more experience, but Pablita and she, if you follow it across, their weekly wage was $15.53. They were paid exactly the same. And then older, more experienced artists were paid $26.50, and this is the supervisor and artist, Davis Meyer, a non-Indian. Native art teachers. After Pablita graduated from high school, Santa Fe Indian School, in 1936, she took a job by the U.S. Indian Service as a teacher's assistant / art instructor at Santa Clara Day School. But after 2 years of employment, Pablita knew that teaching was not for her. She was a perfectionist and she expected the same from her students. She was impatient with children. However, it's interesting to note that several trained Southwestern Native artists with an education chose the route of a steady income and a career as an art teacher in Indian schools or universities. And I'll just quickly mention their names. 5 examples are from Santa Clara, Teofilo Tafoya, from Jemez, Jose Ray Toledo, Cochiti, Joe Herrera, Hopi, Fred Caboti, and San Juan Okeowinge, Jeronimo Cruz Montoya. And Jeronimo worked at Santa Fe Indian School from 1937 to 1962. So she had a very long career in the arts. The next year, 1939, Pablita joined several Native artists who were recruited by artist Olive Rush to create a series of murals for Maisel, an Indian curio shop business in Albuquerque on the popular Route 66. Olive Rush's biographer, Jan Gilman, wrote that Olive Rush, as she had done before, invited talented native artists, many of with whom she'd worked previously, to paint portions of the murals and assist her through the project. These painters were among the best-known native artists of the period: Awad Sira, Narciso Abeta, Harrison Bigay, and Papshe Lee. And Pablita Velarde painted a mural of Pueblo women selling pottery on the left. And you'll see this as a reoccurring theme in some of her art. The artists were paid for their murals, but the records vary on the amount between $100 and $150 for maybe 2 to 3 weeks worth of work. The difference is probably based on the size of the mural. And recently, maybe those in the audience know, I heard that Maisels is closing. Does anybody know? Is that a yes?
Yes.
And it's a yes. What happens with the murals is an interesting question. The high point of Velarde's art under the WPA was her intermittent work at Bandelier National Monument. Residencies that began in 1939 and continued to as late as 1948. She worked as a museum preparator, and this is her employment form, which says that she is to prepare Pueblo-style paintings, museum exhibit posters, labels, and decorations for the new CCC-built Visitor Center. Collection records at Bandelier list over 70 paintings made by Pablita. They illustrated Pueblo traditional culture, such as craft production, food preparation, harvesting, animals, hunting, governance, and ceremonial dances. Her pictures were intended to orient visitors to the ancestral Pueblo site, like this kind of didactic, kind of a painter's version of a diorama, helping visitors to imagine a vibrant community at work in an ancestral Pueblo site. Pablita and the National Park Service had a very flexible financial arrangement. And in Pablita's words, she recalled, quote, "When they had money, they came and got me. And when they didn't, they took me home." She was paid as a skilled worker because of her art education at Santa Fe Indian School. It was a good wage of $4 to $5 a day during the Depression. An intangible financial advantage at Bandelier was a network of supporters, mentors actually, specifically her supervisor and friend Dale King, who supervised her artwork at Bandelier. Years later, in 1960, it was the same man, Dale King, who published Pablita's illustrated children's book, Ontewa Tales. After the Bandelier job ended in 1948, that was completing the first phase, if you will, of Pablita's life as an emerging artist. So that if we look back from when she started with the New Deal programs in 1934 as an 18-year-old student or so, all through 48, you'll see her PWAP murals, you'll see her teaching job, you'll see her work. She tried working in a hospital, that didn't work either. She tried to be independent. As you can see, her income fell. You see the mural in Albuquerque. And right before Bandelier, she was at Chaco doing somewhat the same thing, but then transferred to Bandelier. And you see the span dates for that. So look at the blue for federal income, and then remember what I said about looking at her as a transitional artist who got her start in the field by federal government patronage. So it kind of makes sense, it ties in together. So after Bandelier, she basically had to come up with a plan for being independent, selling a large volume of affordably priced artwork, and establishing a home studio of her own where she could begin a small art business. And as you can see, a place to paint was important for all Native artists. This didn't look like it when they built it in 1941. Pablita's first home studio was a new adobe house, something never done in the Pueblo, built by an unmarried woman. Once again, unconventional. It was built in Santa Clara between 1940 and 41. And in interviews, Velarde recalled that she financed the new construction primarily from her wages at Bandolier. Her studio was her artist workspace where she made and sold her artwork, a necessity for any aspiring artist. But her first studio was short-lived. She left in 1941 for temporary wage work in Albuquerque. She met an Anglo man who she married and began an itinerant life as a World War II bride and mother. So by the late 1940s, her growing family settled in a new house in Albuquerque, and Pablita continued to paint in any available space, mostly on the kitchen table between family meals, and later, as in this picture, in a converted bedroom. In the early 1950s, Pablita struggled as a Native woman artist by attempting to participate in prestigious regional Indian art exhibits. She described the competitive and engendered environment at the annual juried, quote, exhibition of contemporary American Indian paintings at the Philbrook Art Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She said, quote, I got started in the early 50s when I got brave enough to start sending my work over there. For the first few years, this is a quote, I didn't win a damn thing because it was all men jury and men artists entering. But finally I broke the ice with the men artists. And after that, they couldn't ignore me anymore. Her efforts and her quality artwork prevailed. In 1953, Velarde was selected as the grand prize winner. And according to the museum rules, as the grand prize winner, the following year, Pablita became a juror, thereby breaking the second glass ceiling as the first Native woman juror. By the late 1950s, her annual income from awards and prize money steadily increased, as you can see from these slides. So, it's 11 years from 1958 all the way down to 68. This is the award money. This is the price. These are the buyers. And this is her income. And one of the things that you should notice down here is almost every museum exhibit or similar kind of an exhibition of Indian art had a charge. So there was a 10%, 20% charge that came off the top. Nowadays you think of other expenses like booth fees and other things. But this was a show in the museum, and that was the charge, kind of a handling charge for the exhibit. They mounted the show for them. You'd mail your stuff in, they'd mount it. If it sold, they'd send you the money or mail the painting, unsold painting back, or tour it. By 1956, Pablita Hardin was well enough known to receive a lucrative commission from the Foote, that's F-O-O-T-E, cafeteria in Houston, Texas. After an exchange of business letters, the owner agreed to pay an attractive sum of $1,000 plus $100 for material. The commission was for a large mural of the green corn dance that you see here, to be displayed in their popular restaurant. However, because it was too large for her house, she constructed the 7 panels and painted them outside in the backyard. The project took over her entire family house and disrupted the household. Her husband was not pleased. The mural project increased existing tensions between the husband and wife, so it's not surprising that their 1957 divorce became an economic turning point for the artist. It made a professional business career now a necessity for financial survival. At that moment, 1957, Pablita became a Native entrepreneur. taking on significant financial risks as a small business owner. She needed cash quickly, so she sold her Santa Fe home studio and quickly transformed her Pueblo-style house in Albuquerque into a second home studio. And over the next 50 years or so, Pablita Velarde worked from her home studio at 804 Adams Street in Albuquerque. A studio within her family home was an economic choice because it kept overhead expenses low, and it had certain tax advantages because you could deduct a percentage of overhead costs as business expenses. But her primary central business challenge was to successfully compete in a competitive native art market. And as we learned from Dr. Adams, it was a seasonal business in the mid-20th century. The annual cycle of Indian markets, fairs, and exhibitions were times of furious activity for artists, followed by perhaps quiet but anxious downtimes. Since her business was operating on a cash basis, Velarde had to find ways to ensure a constant flow of income throughout the year. That was the challenge. The answer was to increase and diversify her product lines. And a quick survey shows the range of Velarde's artistic creativity as an artist and author. So I'll briefly go through and highlight a few of these. In paintings, Pablita could make very fine watercolor or earth paintings for commissions or high-end juried shows. They were the top of the line of her products, but they were time-intensive to make and expensive to buy. Pot boilers, on the other hand, the most popular item in Pablita's product line was a small earth painting of a single figure, such as a Pueblo buffalo or eagle dancer, antelope, deer, or bird. Earth paintings were made, as you can see by this picture, by collecting, grinding, and sifting desert rocks and minerals into dry pigments with amano and metate. This is the Heard Museum's re-envisioning of her studio in Albuquerque, and if you look down below, there is her original. The mono metate weighed about 100 pounds, and she said she found it in Santa Clara and that it was very old. Pot boilers were Pablita's, or earth paintings, were Pablita's signature brand, coming back to brand. They sold so well that she called them her pot boilers. They were popular with both artists and buyers because the small paintings were quickly made, possibly in about 2 days. They sold at an affordable price most people could afford. They were portable, and they were framed by the artist and ready to hang. And so I'll point out that if you go to your local lumber company, that's baseboard molding. And she put about 8 layers of paint on that, and it kept her costs down and her profits up. She also made large earth paintings. And she kept the press interested, if I can, yeah. So this is one at the Wheelwright Museum. And if you look down below on the left side, that's the construction of it. Kind of reminds you of that Foot Cafeteria mural with different panels or structural elements to keep it from warping. And if you look on the right, I like the look on her face because she's got like a secret, and underneath the thing, it says in the press that there is a secret ingredient in her earth paintings, and she wasn't talking then. But we found out later, it was Elmer's glue. She also made dolls. From the 1950s throughout her whole career, she made dolls. And she started copywriting her dolls. So I actually bought that doll. She took the doll, she named it, of course, Pablita, she said. So every doll, female doll, was Pablita. She took it into her kitchen table, she got out a black permanent marker, and she wrote her name, the copyright, and the year. And she did that on everything after 1977. She also, in the late 60s, made clay figurines. There are very few of these. These are at the Heard Museum. They're her only ceramic arts. Her sister Ligoria was an award-winning potter, but these were different. They were made and sold during the 1960s and possibly from Santa Clara, we're not sure. And if you look at this picture of her daughter and granddaughter at the New Mexico Arts and Crafts Fair, you'll see down below on the table these clay figurines. We don't know the price of them, but she didn't do them for long. Books. In 1960, Pablita Velarde became a published author of her own illustrated children's book, Old Father the Storyteller. And the financial significance of the book was not only as a new product line, but also Pablita entered a new market, a literary market of children and adult readers. There were 2 editions of her book. This is one of the illustrations. She called them legend pictures. This is her favorite. This is the story of, kind of a Cinderella story of Turkey Girl. There were 2 editions of her book, in 1960 by Northland Press, and in 1989 by Clearlight Publishers in Santa Fe. The first book was out of print for almost 30 years, and it really frustrated Pablita. She had nothing to sell. However, in 1989, the second edition, and this is her selling the first edition books right here. That was the cheaper, that was like $6.95, $7.95. And then a boxed edition was like $12.95. This is the second edition, which was totally redesigned. The format was horizontal now, it was all rephotographed. And Pablita held the copyright on this as author and artist on both publications, and that copyright becomes important later. Pablita faced a financial choice whether or not to take conventional royalties, and as a savvy businesswoman, she learned she could make more money purchasing a large quantity of books at the author's discounted price and reselling them at full price. It offered a marketing opportunity to personally inscribe and autograph the book for buyers, and calculations on data from Velarde's 1998 taxes show that she made the right choice. She made a $10 profit on every book in that second edition that she made. She also tried her hand at doing more stories. This was the how-to stories, but they were only published in a magazine a year later in 1961. I'll briefly go through the next section. This is about licensing. And it's a wonderful income stream for Velarde or other artists. It was a contractual process that granted legal permission to a licensee to use her artwork for a limited time, for a specific purpose. And I will give you one high-end example. Well, these are some of the calendars that she did. This is the New Mexico magazine in 1996, and on the back, every month had a different picture. She even did fabric calendar things, and she also did tiles. And beware, if you see a tile with her embossed name on it, they're fakes in the market now. So here's the high-end example of licensing. And my thanks go out to my friends for this picture. In 1974, the Franklin Mint, a prominent business engaged in the collectible trade, met with several leading Native artists at IAIA to explore a commercial project on a historical theme, and the result was a silver coin set entitled The Medallic History of the American Indian. The innovation, probably born in that meeting, was to represent both indigenous and non-indigenous interpretations of 50 significant events in American Indian history. So the Mint's brochure promoted the collectible coin set as, quote, each metal is sculpted on both sides. You see the metals on the left side there, to depict two different versions of the same single event. Each event is portrayed as our history book recorded it and as the Indian himself interprets it. These are Pablita's coins. Her coin was the first coin in the set to be issued under the theme Migration to the New World. Her design was a very complex symbolic landscape of Pueblo cosmology, reminiscent of her earth painting and grandfather storyteller. The second coin on the right, under the theme of athletics, depicted the Pueblo game of shinny, similar to lacrosse. This set sold for $1,250 if you were a Mint subscriber, which is $25 a coin, and the price doubled to the general public. Now, something interesting happened here in Santa Fe since I've been here on my fellowship. I found another one. In the past 3 weeks, I made an exciting discovery. A third Velarde coin design appeared for sale at a Santa Fe gallery. The framed artwork was her original pen and ink drawing and the mounted coin. Really an amazing find. So there's the drawing, and there's the coin. The other part of her income stream came from copywriting. Copyright was an important money matter in her native business because it guaranteed legal and financial protections for her art. When her daughter Helen Hardin experienced a copyright infringement, Pablita became very conscientious about writing her name, her date, as you saw on the doll, and the copyright mark on every product she made from 1977 onward. And you'll also see some of these cards. They carried the copies or reproductions of paintings. And on the bottom you see copyright 1999 here. So curators may be interested to know that the presence or absence of copyright marks can help date Velarde's artwork, and maybe you own some yourself. You might want to go home and see if there's a copyright date on it or not. Generally, a Velarde painting without a copyright mark can be reasonably assumed to have been made prior to 1977. This is Pablita Velarde's business marketing plan, and I'm just going to highlight a couple of things for you. Let me go back. Well, her principles of affordable art, selling at full price, no consignments, no paid advertising, and then her retail and wholesale strategies of how to make a good income. So she resold goods made by others when she set up her booth. That included these books, posters, catalogs. In wholesale world, she did not believe in consignment. That means you wait for your money, right? She wanted to make cash transactions with the dealers immediately. So Pablita had an informal financial arrangement with kind of a de facto gallery, Enchanted Mesa Indian Arts, owned by her friends Fred and Marguerite Chase. The Chases paid Pablita 2/3 or 66% of the asking price for her paintings. And the Chases bought pieces outright from her to help her out during difficult times, so they were kind of like a bank. And Enchanted Mesa's popular Christmas shows were always, quote, good for extra income in the winter, which, as we've seen in a seasonal market, it could be a slow season for Indian markets in the wintertime. This is one of 3 of Pablita's business cards. It's the I think 1980s is the closest I can come to this. She did not pay for advertising. Hundreds of newspapers and magazine articles and biographies popularized her brand as a native artist at no cost to her. And her accessibility to media in Albuquerque was also an important factor. in this constant stream of free publicity which reached a national audience. So her only paid advertising were her business cards. Now, for a researcher, finding data is really exciting. This is about taxes and tax records. This picture is Pablita's son, Herbert Hardin II, also known as Herbie. And a couple of years ago, when I was in town, he discovered a few of his mother's things in an outbuilding behind her Adams Street house that he inherited. This is when she was a living treasure at Gallup Intertribal. But what makes a researcher really happy is in that box on the left. The box included 8 years of federal tax records, 1995, and then a gap, and then 1997 to 2003. They recorded the finances of Pablita V. Hardin, her legal name, at the end of her long career in native art. Pablita reveals herself as a very careful record keeper and money manager who knew how every dollar was spent. And there's Schedule C that she had to fill out, and with all of this quantitative data, I could start doing these things. So this is a sample from tax data made into pie charts to show her income for 2 years. And you can see how Social Security played a big part in her income as a senior. And I could do bar graphs of art sales by product line. How exciting. And you can see what was selling for 2000 anyway. And then in dolls, she had all the expenses that she had to buy to make her dolls. So I could chart from little information where I could find prices of dolls, including the one that I bought from her, which I didn't know I was going to buy, and I'm not a doll collector, but she was a good salesperson. So these are the expenses and the prices on a graph to give you an idea of what her business was like. Then you could do projections of productivity from people who were concerned about trying to estimate that. So 4 different sources, the last one being the artist herself. How many paintings did she make in a year? And how many days did she spend to make each painting? And here's the gross income projections. She was estimating almost $40,000 during that time year that we had for the tax records. So the last quick section is on legacy. In this chart, which I made in October, I correctly said there were 3 generations of American Indian women artists in her family. I need to update that. There are 4 now. And is Helen here? She's not here? Okay. So in 2012, if you'll see Marguerite Bagshot, she created a press called Little Standing Spruce Press, and it's a private press, and she commissioned a trilogy, including one on Pablita. And it was also the driving force in the establishment of a museum you may have seen called the Pablita Velarde Museum of Indian Women in the Arts. It was in Santa Fe, just to the right of the cathedral. Unfortunately, it closed when Marguerite died suddenly in 2015. But the legacy lives on because now Helen is also exhibiting at the Blue Ring Gallery in Santa Fe, so the legacy continues and expands. Another part of her legacy is that the Heard Museum was a recipient of the large archival collection from the Shuttered Museum, and her studio was installed in their exhibit galleries. There's a close-up again. And her artwork, the betrothal on the left side there, was installed in their galleries. So here's the large exhibit case. Here's the painting integrated into the design. And here's a close-up of her painting. There's also road signs right outside the entrance of Santa Clara Pueblo, scenic historic markers on her life. And I would like to conclude with just a little story, and it's about that bottom picture there, which is a license plate. I began with a true story about the alchemy of native art. I'd like to end with a final story about native art and automobile license plates. In 1999, the National New Deal Preservation Association in New Mexico created a series of automobile license plates to raise money for youth art education. One of the 6 legacy art plates was a Native American painting made by Velarde when she worked at Bandolier. Now, New Deal art is considered a work for hire, and it's owned by the federal government, not the artist. However, the association, as a point of courtesy, asked Pablita for approval to use it. She readily agreed and realized the value of free publicity, kind of free mobile publicity. Her original 1940 painting, which you see on the top, is entitled, originally, "Guard Turning Tourists Away." It was, I think, a suggestion by her supervisor, Dale King, to educate tourists on respecting cultural protocols of private Pueblo ceremonies that were not public. So it shows in this picture a Pueblo official with his cane of authority raised, stopping a carload of tourists. By the way, I looked up the car. I think it's a 1940 two-door sedan made by Chevy. From entering the Pueblo during a religious ceremony. However, as a license plate, the painting needed to be renamed, so it was more welcoming to prospective buyers. So with Pablita's consent, her painting, "Guard Turning Tourists Away," was renamed to, and I think, I'm not sure, yeah, the title is on the bottom of the plate there. The new title is "Governor Greets the Tourists." What a flip. But Pablita was known for a very good sense of humor, so she probably laughed at the irony of the renaming. So Pablita the artist wanted to help young art students. Pablita the businesswoman enjoyed the thrill of making a sale, so together she probably was happy that her reproduced painting on the license plate sold for $25 each. So it looked like irony sells. This is my last slide. In conclusion, my economic study reveals Pablita Velarde as one of the earliest professional artists and entrepreneurs who made a living solely through her art. Her business strategy was to make a volume of affordable visual and literary art products and sell them at different price points. With increasing experience in finances and legal matters, Pablita Velarde built a profitable, home-based small business. Her unique brand illustrates how a professional native artist became a viable and sustainable career in the 20th century. And lastly, both as an artist and as an entrepreneur, Pablita Velarde continues to inspire and continues to transform the economics of native art today. Thank you very much.